a journey through moments of turmoil.
Order!
Moments of triumph.
How many of you? 13.
Papa! It is France!
Moments of crisis. Moments of pulling back from the brink.
We helped rebuild China. If we don't do that, China's not where they are right now.
中华民族以改革开放的姿态，继续走向未来。
2018, a year of pivotal moments. Hello and welcome to CGTN's 2018 year-end special, Pivotal Moments. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. The words previously displayed on the big screen are key words from CGTN's tweets in 2018. Fittingly, some of them will feature in today's year-end wrap-up. From the confrontation of the world's largest economies to the uneven faith in globalization. From the cooling of nuclear threat to Cold War-era dogfights, 2018 saw political leaders struggle to gain domestic support, business leaders grilled for technological oversight, negotiators bargaining for better deals, but some people are still losing more than their jobs. To begin our wrap-up of this year, we start from the most scrutinized bilateral ties in the world, China-U.S. relations. The past 365 days saw the relationship between China and the U.S. being pushed to the brink. And what happened between the world's two largest economies have made many ponder the future of this 40-year-old relationship.
Almost 40 years ago, on January 1st, 1979, China and the United States elevated their diplomatic relations to the ambassadorial level, ending decades of frozen bilateral ties. The two countries' declaration to establish ties and China's announcement to start its reform and opening up happened almost simultaneously. Since then, bilateral relations have fostered economic and social developments for people in both nations. The two countries have an enormous influence on global issues, and their cooperation in many affairs has remained stable. China also became the world's second largest economy after the U.S. in 2010. The two-way trade has witnessed gigantic growth over the past 40 years, but also the largest trade friction in 2018. The trade war emerging this year casts a shadow over bilateral ties. These moments of divergence halted at the end of 2018. The two presidents held a meeting and agreed to a truce. A new round of trade talks will take place in Beijing in early January. Will the bilateral relationship warm up again in 2019?
Now let's take a brief review of how the trade tensions between two of the world's largest economies escalated during the year. In March, Trump signed off on duties on steel and aluminum, targeting many countries, including China. He also threatened to impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods worth about $50 billion. At the beginning of April, though, China hit back with tariffs of up to 25% on about $3 billion worth of American goods. In May, American and Chinese delegations held talks in Beijing, but they failed to reach a resolution. The following talks to mend trade ties also failed. In July, the U.S. began to impose 25% additional tariffs on $34 billion of Chinese goods. The list covers farming equipment, industrial machinery, medical devices, cars, airplane parts, and China levied retaliatory tariffs at the same level on selected U.S. goods, mainly agricultural ones like pork, soybeans, tobacco, but also whiskey, salmon, and off-road vehicles. In August, both sides imposed 25% tariffs on another $16 billion worth of each other's goods. Now, in September, the U.S. again slapped 10% tariffs on $200 billion of imports from China. China went ahead as well and slapped 10% tariffs on $60 billion of products. By then, most of the American exports to China were covered. At the start of November, a phone call between President Xi and President Trump restarted talks. They met December at this year's G20 summit and agreed temporarily to stop imposing new tariffs and to hash out a deal before the end of a 90-day truce. For more on China-U.S. ties, with us in our Beijing studio, Mr. Huo Jianguo, who is the Deputy Chairman of the China Society of World Trade Organization Studies and also ex-president of the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Mr. Huo, welcome to our year-end program. First question to you. China-U.S. engaged in apparent trade war in the year 2018. Are we seeing hope in the near future, two sides reaching consensus?
Now I think the situation has some a little bit changed. There's some positive signal. I think one is from the Buenos Aires, the leaders meet, and they have some consensus in the meeting. And also recently we noticed both China and U.S. send out some positive signals. So I hope in the coming months, when the negotiations started, I hope they can reach some consensus.
Both U.S. and China are some of the world's two largest economies. Obviously, the relationship between them is not limited to them alone, but rather have a global impact. On that point, how do you see the next year, 2019, where things are going?
Because China and U.S. both are big countries, so any action or any issues towards the world governance will have very strong influence. Recently we noticed this year's coming economy, people all feared about the tension of China and the U.S. relations. So China and the U.S. should avoid the confrontation and seek for the more chance for the opportunity to cooperate each other, especially to make some contributions to the world governance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huo Jianguo, for joining us. China-U.S. ties trump all other bilateral ties in the current global arena. Throughout the year, I have spoken to dozens of officials, scholars, and filmmakers. We talked about the different aspects of bilateral ties covering politics, trade, military, and people-to-people exchanges. Here's some highlights. China and the United States already on a confrontation road?
It's quite clear that very often people have different perceptions of where their best interests lie. And the key is to identify common interests, to work together, to expand our common interests, and achieve a win-win outcome. You see, people always want to have a bigger piece of the pie. So let's work together to make the pie bigger, so everybody could have a bigger piece. This is a constructive and cooperative approach.
How many of those in the decision-making process about China-U.S. relations right now, in the White House or in Washington as a whole, really know much about what China-U.S. has gone through in order to be where we are?
Again, it comes back to part of the problem that we have in the United States. There is not a deep bench, so to speak, of knowledge of China, its history, its culture, its interests. Many of those who are knowledgeable have been relegated to, quote, elite, and therefore not to be trusted. That's something that we have an obligation to overcome, that we have to persuade the American people that no, knowledge is a good thing. It's not something to be denigrated. Having cultural exchanges, cultural knowledge of each other is a good thing.
40 years ago, the interlink that is that the U.S.-China relations normalization is very useful for Chinese opening up and reform. We need American investment. America needs us. Needs Chinese market. They embrace China into American-led international order. They thought they want to drag China in so that to change China. But the 40 years history showed that China is successful, but Chinese social system, political system remain, and we have more confidence than before. Then some Americans feel, uneasy, feel disappointed, even feel frustration. Then they want to have some new strategy. But the 40 years of the history told us U.S.-China relations, Chinese development, Americans' development, those things are highly, linked.
It makes no sense for two superpowers on the planet not to do everything in their power to get along. The big problem that I see, and it's something that we try to address in this film, is that I feel there's a real information deficit between the two countries, which we try to address a little bit in the film, but the Chinese indisputably understand America way better than Americans understand China.
I didn't know anything about China. I found myself on the computer looking at different things. And I would say that they're my friends. I wouldn't just call them my coworkers, because when I walk through the plant, if you would notice that I'm always saying ni hao to them and shao, and they was like, won't you try the tea? And so when I have my cup and everybody see me, what are you drinking, leaves? And I say, it's Chinese tea. And I love my Chinese tea, and everybody like, she's going to turn into a Chinese lady now.
Another incident that grabbed the worldwide attention is the detention of the CFO of Chinese tech giant Huawei. Ms. Meng Wanzhou was detained by the Canadian authorities at the United States' request on the very first day of December. The U.S. accused her of fraud related to alleged violations of U.S. sanctions on Iran. Ms. Meng denied the charges during the rounds of hearings. Detained for over 10 days, she was finally granted bail with a guarantee of about $7.5 million. But the CFO is facing possible extradition from Canada to the U.S. Many have voiced anger with the detention, calling the case a miscarriage of justice. This has left many wondering if China and the U.S. are getting far more disconnected. Are the two countries entering a decoupling period? Is the U.S. trying to derail China from the global system? I have spoken to renowned Chinese and American scholars over the months. Take a listen.
Well, the best thing that China can do is first not to be misled by those attempts. Okay? They want to decouple, I'll decouple anyway with you. I think it's not the right way to go. And secondly, I think China should reflect on itself. Why we still face all these demands and challenges from others. What can we do to improve on our side so that the decoupling argument will not go as strong as
will die out.
Yeah, would disappear eventually if you are doing well. Okay. The best response, as far as China is concerned, is try to improve itself rather than blaming others. It doesn't help.
What is this decoupling, so-called idea that has been pushed by some to you?
So there's a few big words. One is called New Cold War. Another one is called decoupling. Another one is called isolating. So the thought is somehow you could isolate China from the global economy.
Can you?
I think you can say those words, but China is a backbone of the global economy. China is the major trading partner of every American ally and friend in Asia. So if you go to Australia or to Singapore or to Japan and you say, I have a good idea, you should decouple your economy to be friendly with us from China. They don't know what you're talking about. They say, do you know China is our major trading partner? China is essential for our economic growth. If my government were to do that and had an economic recession, I won't be the leader of the government.
The clash between China and the U.S. has certainly global ramifications. The two giants have taken on, some say, different ways of coexisting with other countries. China is saying it is dedicating to sharing the experiences of 40 years' worth of reform and opening up. The U.S., though, has witnessed President Trump's America First evolving into America Alone. In the next part, we will highlight the moments in 2018 when China and the U.S. chose different paths and how it will affect global governance. You're watching 2018 Year-End Special Pivotal Moments on CGTN. We live in troubled times with doubts and questions about the global order. It is often said that the unipolar world order dominated by the U.S., which emerged at the end of the Cold War, has lately shifted to a multipolar one, owing to the growing geopolitical weight of emerging economies. The world in 2018 has indeed seen a shift in the balance of power, a continuation of the repressive trend in Western politics, and the escalation in major country competition. Although multilateralism and the existing international order have undergone unprecedented strain, the world has come to a pivotal moment: where to go and which to choose, multilateralism or unilateralism. Globalization is at crossroads.
Today, world order is increasingly chaotic, power relations are less clear.
Most policymakers believe globalization is the force that will help eradicate poverty in the 21st century. But there are also those who fear that they are on the losing end of the deal. In some places, advocates for multilateralism are losing support, and champions of unilateralism are claiming that they can solve all of their problems. A strong international system needs to be supported by the significant players. While the U.S. helped create the United Nations after World War II, the current administration has been on the withdrawal binge, from climate change to human rights, from trade to security.
The United States will withdraw.
We live in a deeply interconnected world.
We need to safeguard multilateralism because it's the only way forward.
Und wir sind überzeugt, wir müssen die multilaterale Zusammenarbeit stärken.
The multilateral approach is not dead, it has to be maintained.
Pour promouvoir des approches multilatérales.
But even the believers of global governance find the mechanism currently in place to be ineffective in some cases. So can multilateralism survive and thrive?
With great concern. Challenges are global, and there is no way to address a global challenge if we don't have a multilateral approach and if we don't have norms that are accepted by everybody. And unfortunately, this is being put into question. We see more and more unilateral initiatives, we see more and more people putting into question the kind of rules that were accepted by everybody in different areas, be it in trade, be it in questions of peace and security or whatever. And so I do believe that this is a moment in which we need to be very strongly committed to multilateral institutions, to strengthen them, and to be very strongly committed to a rules-based international order.
What about the parties that seem to be not necessarily convinced about this logic that you have been advocating?
I think we need to make people understand that a unilateral solution might sometimes seem to be immediately producing positive impacts. But in the long term, we need to have win-win solutions. Because if we have zero-sum solutions for our problems, those that might be winning today will lose tomorrow. And we need sustainable solutions, especially in a world that is smaller and smaller. We need to be able to have inclusive solutions in which consultations are held in a way that everybody can participate.
I don't think in the 20 or 30 years to come, the Chinese people will look like the American people, or the European people, or even the African people. There are differences. They must be respected. The question again is whether there is enough consensus that we have to address issues of financial stability, of migration control, on environment degradation
the
together.
Real common ground.
Absolutely. And this will bring huge benefits to us all while keeping some political differences which stem from deeply rooted cultural, religious, spiritual, philosophical differences. After all, globalization is not uniformization. It's doing together the challenges we have to face together.
Facing the headwinds of protectionism, China has put its weight behind a multilateral world order. 2018 was the year China championed multilateralism and reiterated its commitment to opening up and promoting global prosperity.
In the past 40 years, we have made a historic transition from a closed and semi-closed country to one that embraces all-round opening up.
As the world's second-largest economy, China recognizes that along with greater power comes greater responsibility. Since the country began its reform and opening up 40 years ago, China has gone from a newcomer to a significant player in global affairs. This year, the Chinese government showed the world its commitment to multilateralism by hosting 4 major international events for win-win cooperation. In the spring, more than 2,000 world leaders, business giants, and scholars attended the annual Boao Forum for Asia in China's southern island of Hainan.
We will enhance alignment with international economic and trading rules, increase transparency, strengthen intellectual property protection, uphold the rule of law, encourage competition, and oppose monopoly.
In early summer, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, welcomed the 2 new members to their summit in the coastal city of Qingdao. Their leaders agreed to work together more on security, development, and regional integration. In autumn, Beijing welcomed the leaders from 49 African countries to the 7th Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. President Xi Jinping from China pledged $60 billion of financing. In November, the first ever China International Import Expo, or CIIE, showcased the country's commitment to keep opening up its massive market to the world. To summarize China's global strategy into one phrase: to build a community of shared future.
I was very much struck and inspired by President Xi Jinping's statement when he really made such a very visionary statement for the broader partnerships. For example, he said that China is going to broaden and widen their contributions to the international community by broadening the market access. He is committed to create some attractive environmental atmosphere for China. It is a manifestation and demonstration of self-confidence as well as a strong commitment to work together with the world at large. Now, China, as one of the still developing countries, but has been taking very important initiatives, reaching out to many developing countries, particularly Africa and other Southeast Asian countries. This is a very important one, to connect China with the outside world through economic and technical cooperation process. You have already been approaching to many countries. In this world, with the transformative development of technology and transformation, the communications, then this world has become effectively one small planet Earth.
Well, I've had the great privilege of being involved in a conversation with the Chinese government from the very beginning, when the idea first came to President Xi's mind, and we began talking with him about it. But then I've also
and I also understand the World Bank is also doing some wonderful report about the results so far about the Belt and Road Initiative.
We're looking at the implications of Belt and Road for development as a whole. But then I've also heard directly from countries that are now very worried about, suspicious of the Belt and Road Initiative. And so if we take a step back, the original idea of the Belt and Road Initiative was to improve connectivity. And that's in roads, rails, trade, connectivity in terms of broadband access. These are all really important and really good ideas. There are many countries that think that this is strictly a Chinese initiative. But if you ask President Xi today, I think he will tell you that he always intended for this to be a partnership. This is what he has told me. Finding a path forward to create the partnership that will be necessary to see a shared vision of connectivity across this entire region. If we can make that happen, it will absolutely be a game changer for those countries. But I think the things that are critical right now are, one, we need to talk so that the countries and the leaders understand each other.
We've got really wonderful objectives, principles and policies that are embedded in the United Nations developmental goals, that are also embedded in Africa 2063, the Africa that we want, but that are also embedded in what we've now signed up to. We're signing up a number of agreements as Africa, the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and also the relationship that we have collectively as a continent with China, but individually with China as well. Now, that is a wonderful cocktail.
I love it, the way you said it.
Yes, a wonderful cocktail of objectives, of goals that we have to put together to produce a win-win.
The old world orders were put to test for the year 2018, and the new orders are yet to be established. Luckily, there's still stronger faith in connectivity than in isolation. Every year brings with it headlines that have the audience on the edge of their seats. 2018 was no exception.
We're going to win it, and because we have all the cards.
China and the U.S. locked their horns in a trade dispute, slapping 4 rounds of retaliatory tariffs on each other. The two countries are now on a 90-day truce with no clear end to the trade war in sight. In a historic step forward to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, DPRK leader Kim Jong-un met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean President Moon Jae-in 3 times each, and has also met with U.S. President Donald Trump. The Pyongyang nuclear test site was destroyed to demonstrate the country's commitment. China looks back to mark the 40th anniversary of reform and opening up, and charts major tasks for the future. The country has come a long way to finally bid farewell to hunger, shortage, and poverty that plagued its people for thousands of years.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. From the Paris Climate Accord, we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out.
French President Emmanuel Macron's fuel tax plan sparked a political crisis when demonstrations turned into month-long riots across France. It is the most severe protest movement to strike France in recent decades. On October 2nd, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi walked into the country's consulate in Istanbul and never walked out. Saudi Arabia said he was killed on the orders of a rogue intelligence officer. Turkey, however, says they have evidence that the order came from the highest levels. The White House has stood by Saudi Arabia during the scandal. The complex diplomatic situation makes it difficult to tell the full story. The UK is due to leave the EU on March 29. Although Prime Minister Theresa May reached an agreement with the EU over the divorce, deep divisions in British Parliament have raised the chances of leaving without a deal.
It was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
More than 50 million Facebook users' personal data was compromised for research to better identify their voting behavior during the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign.
You're watching CGTN's 2018 year-end special, Pivotal Moments. Now we turn to pivotal moments on the Korean Peninsula. Monumental summits have solidified 2018 as a year of diplomacy and a year with more dialogue across the DMZ than at any time since an armistice halted major combat in 1953. The landmark summit between leaders of the United States and of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, in Singapore this year attracted global attention. Will all the parties meeting face-to-face lead to a peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? That is the question.
Throughout the Korean Peninsula, 2018 has been a year of historic change. This year also witnessed frequent meetings between various parties. The leaders of the DPRK and South Korea met 3 times. From March to June, Kim Jong-un visited China 3 times in a row. The first ever DPRK-US summit finally took place on June 12th in Singapore. Further negotiations and tangible steps from both sides will pave the way for a much-anticipated second meeting, slated to occur in January or February next year.
This significant progress made this year in 2018 on the Korean Peninsula did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of negotiations among major related parties. Earlier this year, I talked to Ambassador Christopher Hill, who is best known for leading the U.S. delegation at the 6-party talks between 2005 and 2007. Hill speaks of the experience for the historic Kim-Trump summit. He also delves into China's critical role in addressing the concerns for all the interested parties.
In fact, it was China's contribution to talk about a process that was action for action. So I felt it was unrealistic, as some Americans had believed in the past, to say, North Korea, you have to do everything, and then maybe we'll think about it and do something. I told Secretary Rice that is not going to work. So we had to have a situation where the North Koreans would do something, we would do something, they would do something else, we would do something. And that was very important to overcome trust problems. Because if we gave them everything to help their economy, how would we know that they'd want to get rid of their nuclear weapons? They've already had their economic assistance. So we had to do it step by step with a tight sequencing of actions.
Will that still work?
I think it's the right way to go.
How did you work with the Chinese side? In other words, what role do you think, Mr. Ambassador, during the 6-party talks, the last 3 rounds that you participated, the role of China in the overall situation?
Well, to be very frank, China was extremely important to this entire process. China controlled the pen. So when we had agreements such as the September 05 statement, or the February 07 statement, or the October 07 statement, these statements were written by the Chinese. So China had a very deep responsibility to try to understand what the U.S. wanted, what the North Koreans wanted, what the Japanese wanted, because sometimes the Japanese had specific issues that they were interested in. So it was a responsibility to try to bring in all these different perspectives. And I think China did it very well, and I think all the people, Chinese, who watched this should have been very proud to see what the Chinese delegation did.
For more insights on the development in the Korean Peninsula for the year 2018, we have Zhao Tong, who is an associate in the Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program based at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Mr. Zhao, welcome to our program, our year-end special. First question to you, this transformation in the year 2018 with the first Kim-Trump summit. Now, in retrospect, how do you see its significance?
I think it's highly significant, and it has 3 components. One is the technological achievement of North Korea. North Korea managed to achieve a rudimentary nuclear deterrent capability. That's the first transformation. That leads to North Korea being able to focus on its second strategic goal, which is economic development. And that makes North Korea willing to open up and engage with the outside world in order to create a good environment for economic development. So all these three things are interconnected, but they are all driven by the internal factor that North Korea has already acquired nuclear deterrent capability.
What about the U.S.?
The U.S. is simply reacting to the North Korean strategic transformation, opening up and engaging and launching a diplomatic offensive.
Having said that, though, the second Kim-Trump summit, in fact, the DPRK has been very much looking forward to it. It was the United States, though, now seem to be delaying this process. So what do you make of the possibility of the second Kim-Trump summit?
Well, Kim Jong-un loves to have a second person-to-person meeting with President Trump because he believes Trump doesn't know much about the substance of the nuclear issue, and therefore he can play Trump, and Trump can be tricked into making important concessions. But it really depends on the internal dynamics in White House. Trump is becoming increasingly lonely. He still wants to paint a picture that everything is going well and there is important progress, but his associates are increasingly disillusional. They want to take tougher measures against North Korea. So it depends on the results of this tussle between Trump and his own advisors. I think in the long run, there is a slightly bigger chance the second summit will take place in 2019.
What about for the other players as well? Remember, it started as a six-party talk, so what would that mean, particularly given the very complicated geopolitical backdrop we are having right now, and that's changing all the time?
Right, we need to remember that North Korea is unlikely to give up its nuclear weapons soon, so the bilateral process between Washington and Pyongyang is likely to be bumpy in 2019. And also we have the rising competition between US and China and the US and Russia. But I think other countries, Russia, China, South Korea, are going to make sure that we do not step back into the chaos and risk of military conflict in 2017. So they are going to continue engaging with North Korea, and in the process making sure that we can continue limiting North Korea's capabilities from further advancing, and also in the long run engaging with North Korea helps trust building and transforming North Korea into a normal country.
Thank you, Zhao Tong, for joining us on our year-end special. Really appreciate it. Thanks. After the historic summit this June, all eyes are now on the potential economic opening up of the DPRK. I caught up with Geoffrey See in Singapore when covering the Kim-Trump summit. See is the founder and chairman of the Chosen Exchange. The group aims to support business-minded individuals in the DPRK through workshops and internships inside and outside the country. I spoke to him about local entrepreneurship and the little-known market economy growing in the DPRK. Tell me about what exactly you do.
Yeah, so we bring volunteers to North Korea to run workshops in economic policy, business and entrepreneurship, and we also bring the North Koreans overseas to places like Vietnam, China, Singapore to learn about how other countries develop their economy.
Okay, so what is the latest trip you have made?
Yeah, so we just went in there in May to run a workshop on startups and entrepreneurship. And we have another trip coming up in August to look at the real estate market in North Korea and to do some training around that.
They do not have yet a market economy. It's all central planned. Why entrepreneurship? Who would receive that kind of training?
Yeah. So I think in the last decade of work that we've been doing there, we have seen things like some form of agricultural reform, where they're giving more of the produce to the farmers and allowing them to own it and trade it. We're also seeing economic zones being developed in North Korea. So they designated a lot of economic zones.
Do you mean the Kaesong development zone that they're having with the South Koreans, or there are also many others?
So that's one zone, but there's like 20 over zones that they have declared in like the last 5 years.
Do they have different functions?
So they are trying to target different industries. Some are a bit more successful. Most of them are still waiting for investors to come in. But I think what's important is that those zones give them a platform to experiment with new policies and new laws that they need to develop the country.
The year 2018 saw a whirlwind of summits involving a receptive DPRK, and entrepreneurs like Geoffrey C. want to get a head start in this potential new market. But further dialogue has stalled. Talk can only take the process so far. Will the year 2019 see more actions overcome the challenges of denuclearization across the Korean Peninsula? Dialogue is the foundation for building consensus and meeting the movers and shakers. I got a chance, together with my colleagues, a front row seat in the year 2018. From Singapore, where Trump and Kim met, to the Boao Forum for Asia, from the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Inspired by different voices, we try to showcase as many viewpoints to the audience as possible. In 2018, history was made through dialogue. However, some other forces are still playing disruptive roles in our lives. You're watching CGTN's 2018 year-end special, Pivotal Moments. As we bid farewell to 2018, it is time to look back on this year's biggest tech stories and how they will shape the year 2019. 2018 was the year that social media's role came into sharper focus, that top tech executives were put in the hot seat, that the world's first gene-edited babies created uproar across the scientific community, and the fight for the future of global telecommunications raged on. At the same time, 2018 was also a year of remarkable advances in artificial intelligence, space exploration, and even the future of transport. So now let's take a look at some of the most popular tech stories.
5G is going from years of hype to becoming reality. Quicker downloads, a more powerful network, and a transformation on how we live, work, and play. Smartphone users will enjoy a more streamlined experience. Autonomous cars, smart communities, immersive education, a supercharged world of 5G. And now, a battle is on to determine who will dominate the future.
2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
With the Falcon 9 rocket liftoff carrying a new GPS-3 satellite, SpaceX accomplished 21 launches this year. But Elon Musk is dreaming much higher, announcing in September that he will take the first private passenger to the moon by 2023.
10, 9, 2.
Launched in August, NASA's Parker Solar Probe has made the closest ever approach to the Sun. It's also the busiest year in China's space history. 35 space launches. That includes the highly acclaimed Chang'e 4 mission, visiting the far side of the moon. Genetically edited twin girls born with HIV resistance by altering DNA in embryos during in vitro fertilization. That shocked the whole world. Scientific breakthrough or ethical irresponsibility. Designer babies or improved lives.
The world has moved on to the stage for embryo genome editing. There will be someone somewhere who is doing this. If it's not me, it's someone else.
For more discussion on the latest development of technology and science, we are joined by Andy Mock, non-resident fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Andy, welcome to our year-end special.
Pleasure to be here, Tianwei.
Several things I want to go with you. One is about the gene editing technology on human embryos. Of course, that incident is like a wake-up call for everybody. But what do you make of this incident in the overall development of the technology?
Well, it certainly caused shock and outrage in China and all around the world. That the solution for this, well, actually, clearly there are risks. But I'm an optimist in that looking ahead, There certainly will be problems, but hopefully these problems can be solved by even further advances in gene editing technology.
Secondly, of course, it's about the 5G. Of course, people widely believe it's going to transform how things are likely to be done for the future.
5G, we all know, and we think about simplistically as just really, really fast. So it really has the potential to change everything, to enable driverless cars, telemedicine.
Probably things that we could not even imagine right now.
Exactly, exactly. So I think, and this of course leads to the geopolitical question, which who is actually going to win the race to 5G? And we see that the United States has long been the technology leaders. And China now is coming up very, very quickly, and we see this is driving a lot of the news cycle in 2018. Huawei, the tensions centered around trade, but really more than just trade. The question is, will geopolitics intervene and cause a shift?
Many believe throughout history that science and technological development should be an area of cooperation rather than just a competition. Having said that, though, the third question for you, Andy, is about space exploration, the Mars and further into the deeper space. How much is there for the chance of cooperation among all players?
Well, I think there's clearly opportunity for both competition and cooperation. What is concerning looking ahead in 2019 is, will we see the militarization of space? So the Trump administration has called for a new space force, so a new branch of the military. Clearly very concerned about who will win the space race. But will this also lead to the militarization of space, which I think probably is not such a good thing. Competition I'm not as worried about, but I think countries can cooperate and compete at the same time. But hopefully it can be done in a peaceful way that is a win for everybody.
Thank you, Andy. Andy Mok, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Tianwei.
2018, that year, is a big year for innovation in technology. Next year marks the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. The changes in technology over the last 50 years have accelerated dramatically, and that has revolutionized our perception of the world. You're watching CGTN's 2018 year-end special, Pivotal Moments. Life can only be understood in hindsight, but it must be lived with foresight. With the eyes fixed on the future, in the coming year, 2019, a lot more pivotal changes are expected. But before we step into the new year, it's good to recall some memories and reflect on some history. In an ever-changing, divided world, can we have both the strength and the curiosity to be ready for the future? 2019 will mark the 70th anniversary of China-Russia diplomatic ties, as well as the 40th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between the People's Republic of China and the United States. How will major country ties develop during this milestone year? After circulating for 2 decades, does the euro still enable a diverse European bloc to function effectively? The UK is set to leave the EU at the end of next March, with Prime Minister Theresa May facing a deadlock in Parliament and the European bloc conceding little.
If we betray that promise, how can we expect them to trust us again?
Is she on track to deliver a Brexit deal that works for everyone? Apollo 11 was the space flight that landed the first 2 people on the moon. Since Neil Armstrong's first moonwalk, how have the lunar missions changed the world? On October the 1st, 2019, the Chinese will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Over the past decades, the success of China has improved the lives of its citizens and attained a global geopolitical situation whereby the country has regained significance. What lessons can we learn from China's rapid development over the past 70 years, and what experiences as well? In October 1969, a student typed LO on computer. Therefore, the birth of the Internet. The Internet has made the world into a hyper-connected global village. Can you imagine what the Internet will look like 5 decades from now? The leaders of the USA and the former Soviet Union, USSR, declared an end to the Cold War after 2 days of storm-lashed talks at the Malta Summit in 1989. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the shredding of the Iron Curtain, the end of 40 years of division between the capitalist West and the communist East. 30 years later, is the world building a new wall? The year 2018 has been a year full of pivotal moments, yet the year 2019 can be no less anticipating. Global economy, international relations, we can only ponder how the world order will be shaped and how technology will leave us in awe. CGTN is looking forward to sharing them as they unfold. On behalf of the World Insight team and CGTN, I'm Tian Wei. We wish you a happy new year. See you in the year 2019.